Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and let our minds drift back to 17th century France, a land of ornate palaces, political intrigue, and, of course, the legendary Musketeers. Forget what you think you know from the movies, the dashing heroes, the endless sword fights, the effortless charm. While those stories certainly have their appeal, tonight, we're going to explore why being a musketeer sucked more than you think. We're going to peel back the layers of romanticized fiction to reveal the gritty, often brutal, realities of their lives. Trust me, it was a far cry from the carefree adventures you might imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Whether that's a quiet evening in Boise, Idaho, or a late night in Miami. Florida, now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself, now, a young man from a minor noble family in rural France, perhaps dreaming of glory in Paris, much like a restless kid in a small town in Montana might dream of making it big in New York City. You've heard the tales, seen the plays, read the pamphlets, the daring exploits of the King's Musketeers, those elite soldiers who serve the monarch directly, living lives of adventure, honor, and perhaps a bit of scandal. This is the seductive power of swashbuckling myths, the romanticized image that paints a vivid, often inaccurate picture of their existence. But as you'll soon discover, the reality of being a musketeer was far more challenging, dangerous, and, frankly, often quite miserable than any fiction could convey. The popular image, largely solidified by Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers, is one of boundless bravado, lightning-fast swordplay, and unwavering camaraderie, often punctuated by witty banter and successful dalliances with noblewomen. You picture D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, always impeccably dressed, always victorious, and always with a clever quip ready. This myth portrays a life where every day is an exciting duel, every mission a thrilling espionage plot, and every night a revelrous feast. It's the kind of fantasy that makes you want to pick up a replica sword at a Renaissance fair, or maybe plan a trip to France, just to soak in the imagined glory. But let's pause and consider the reality. These were soldiers. First and foremost, their lives were governed by military discipline, grueling routines, and the ever-present threat of violence, not just from enemies of the state, but from street brawls and personal duels. They were often poorly paid, sometimes went without pay for months, and were expected to provide their own expensive equipment and horses. Imagine being a highly specialized soldier in today's military, but your paycheck is erratic. You have to buy your own bulletproof vest, and your main mode of transport is a horse that you also have to feed and house. It quickly becomes less about heroism and more about making ends meet. The King's Musketeers, formerly known as the Compagnie des Musketeers du Roi, were indeed an elite corps, but their role was far from being just glorified bodyguards or dueling enthusiasts. They were light cavalry, often deployed as shock troops, engaging in skirmishes, sieges, and pitched battles. Their distinctive muskets, while powerful, were cumbersome and slow to reload, making close-quarters sword combat a frequent necessity. So, while the swordplay was real, it was often a desperate measure, not a stylish dance. A common historical truth is that the romanticized image of the musketeers, popularized by literature, often overshadows the harsh realities of their lives as soldiers, including their challenging financial situations, strict military discipline, and frequent exposure to real combat. This discrepancy highlights the enduring power of myth-making in historical perception. Historians still widely debate the precise balance between their ceremonial duties and active military service, and how often they were truly engaged in large-scale battles versus smaller skirmishes or guard duties. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the reality of being a musketeer is their often makeshift and inadequate billeting arrangements. You imagine them living in grand barracks or cozy inns, but the truth was far less glamorous. When on campaign or traveling, musketeers, like other soldiers, often relied on billeting, meaning they were quartered in private homes, inns, or even barns, sometimes without proper payment, much to the chagrin of the locals. Imagine riding all day, tired and dusty, only to find yourself sleeping on a barn floor next to your horse, or crammed into a tiny room in a peasant's home, with no privacy and questionable sanitation. This was not the plush life of an aristocrat, it was the gritty, uncomfortable existence of a soldier constantly on the move. A far cry from the cozy Paris apartments sometimes depicted in fiction. The concept of a royal guard also needs nuance. While they did perform guard duties for the king and his court, their elite status meant they were often dispatched for special missions, intelligence gathering, or as a rapid reaction force. This meant long periods away from home, arduous travel, and exposure to the elements, all while maintaining a facade of impeccable service. Imagine being constantly on call, ready to ride at a moment's notice across vast distances, through all kinds of weather, without the benefit of modern transportation or even decent roads. The perceived glamour also came with intense competition and strict social hierarchy. To even become a musketeer, you needed a letter of recommendation, usually from a powerful patron, and often a hefty sum of money for your uniform and horse. It wasn't an open recruitment for just anyone with a sword and a dream. This perpetuated an exclusive, often arrogant, culture within the corps, where status and connections were as important as skill. It's like trying to get into an exclusive club today, where it's not just about your talent, but also about who you know and how much money you can flash. The constant threat of disease was another grim reality. Without modern sanitation, medicine, or even basic hygiene, illnesses spread rapidly through military camps and crowded cities. Dysentery, typhoid, smallpox, and various fevers were constant companions, often proving more deadly than enemy swords. A glorious charge might end not with a dramatic duel, but with a lingering, debilitating illness, far from the romanticized image of a heroic death in combat. And then there's the horses. The musketeers were cavalry, meaning their lives literally depended on their mounts. These horses were expensive, required constant care, and were vulnerable to injury and disease. A musketeer losing his horse could be financially ruined, or worse, left vulnerable on the battlefield. Imagine your mode of transport, your weapon platform, and a huge chunk of your personal wealth, all rolled into one living, breathing, and easily vulnerable animal. It added a significant layer of stress and responsibility to their lives. So, while the swashbuckling myths continue to capture our imaginations, the truth about being a musketeer reveals a harsher, more demanding reality. It was a life of financial strain, physical discomfort from makeshift billeting, constant danger from combat and disease, and a rigid social structure that valued connections as much as courage. The dash and flair were real, but they were often a brave front for a daily grind that sucked more than you think. They were indeed brave men, but their lives were far from the carefree adventures of legend. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the swashbuckling myths that glorify the musketeers. Your ancient ancestor. If a musketeer would have faced the grim reality of erratic pay, constant travel with makeshift billeting, and a life of brutal battles far from the romanticized image, It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish heroic tales and idealized figures, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to a harsh, often unglamorous, military existence, driven by duty and a precarious pursuit of honor, leaving us truly grateful for the comforts, stability, and regulated professions that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers. Let's gently return to that less than glamorous reality of the musketeer, where swashbuckling myths clashed with the harsh truths of makeshift billeting and financial strain. If we've just explored the difficult daily lives that contradicted the romanticized legends, tonight we'll delve into the very foundation of their existence, the King's men sort of rank, recruitment, and rigorous training. You might imagine a straightforward path to becoming an elite soldier. But for your aspiring ancient ancestor, joining the Musketeers involved a complex web of social standing, patronage, and a brutal, unyielding regimen that tested every fiber of their being. Imagine yourself, now, a young noble, perhaps from a small estate in rural France, feeling the call of adventure and the lure of the royal service. You're not just anyone. You come from a family with a coat of arms. However minor, this is crucial, because to be the King's men, you needed to be a gentleman, or at least aspire to that status. The Musketeers, despite being professional soldiers, were unique in that they were composed almost entirely of gentlemen, meaning they belonged to the lesser nobility or had obtained some form of noble status. This wasn't a standing army in the modern sense, open to all walks of life. It was an exclusive club, a kind of military brotherhood for those with enough social standing and ambition. It's like trying to get into an elite military academy today. But instead of just needing good grades and physical fitness, you also need to prove your family tree goes back a few centuries and has some land to its name. The recruitment process itself was far from democratic. You couldn't just walk in off the street and enlist. To join the Musketeers, you typically needed a letter of recommendation from an influential patron, perhaps a high-ranking noble, a cardinal, or even a member of the royal family. This patronage was your golden ticket, signaling to the core that you were well-connected and worthy of consideration. Without it, your dreams of glory would likely remain just that, dreams. Imagine applying for your dream job, and the only way to even get an interview is to have a personal letter from a senator or a Fortune 500 CEO. That's the kind of gatekeeping that defined entry into this elite corps. Once you had the recommendation, you still had to meet certain criteria. You had to be of good character, at least on paper, of a certain age, and physically capable. More importantly, you had to be able to afford the substantial initial costs. Musketeers were expected to provide their own horse, their own uniform, which was expensive, despite its practicality, as we'll discuss later, and their own weaponry, including a sword and often a musket. This financial barrier alone excluded the vast majority of the population, ensuring that only those from families with some means could even consider joining. It's like getting accepted to a prestigious university, but then realizing tuition is entirely out of pocket, and you also have to buy your own campus housing and textbooks, which cost as much as a new car. A common historical truth is that entry into the King's Musketeers was largely restricted to gentlemen, requiring social connections and significant personal financial investment for equipment, highlighting their elite but financially demanding status. This contrasts sharply with later, more formalized military recruitment systems. Historians still widely debate the precise average wealth required to sustain a career as a musketeer, and how many promising recruits were effectively barred due to insufficient funds. Regardless of their martial prowess, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about their rigorous training is the emphasis on horsemanship as much as swordsmanship. While the image of a musketeer with a drawn rapier is iconic, They were primarily light cavalry. This meant extensive training in riding, equestrian maneuvers, and fighting from horseback. You weren't just learning to wield a sword. You were learning to control a powerful animal in the chaos of battle, to load and fire a musket while galloping, and to execute complex formations. Imagine trying to master a challenging video game. But instead of a controller, you're on the back of a powerful, unpredictable animal. And your life depends on coordinating your movements perfectly with its own. It's a whole different level of multitasking. Their training wasn't held in a formal academy with standardized drills as we might envision today. Much of it was practical, learned on the job. Under the tutelage of veteran musketeers and experienced officers, you would learn horsemanship from riding masters, swordsmanship from fencing instructors, and the use of the musket and other firearms from drill sergeants. Discipline was harsh, often enforced with physical punishment or public humiliation. Imagine a boot camp that lasted for years, with live-fire exercises and sparring bouts where serious injury was a constant threat. And your instructors might be just as likely to yell at you as offer constructive criticism. The rank structure within the Musketeers was relatively flat for the common musketeer, though there were lieutenants, captains, and the captain-lieutenant who commanded in the king's absence. Promotion was often slow, relying heavily on patronage, distinguished service, and, once again, financial means to purchase higher positions. So, while the Musketeers projected an image of equality among gentlemen, real advancement was still tied to the old aristocratic systems. It's like a corporate ladder where you need both talent and powerful family connections to even get your foot on the next rung. Beyond formal training, a significant part of their education came from informal sparring. Dueling, though technically forbidden, it was rampant and simply surviving their daily lives. They learned to care for their horses, maintain their equipment, navigate complex social situations at court, and live off their wits when funds were low. This informal training in survival and adaptability was perhaps even more crucial than their formal military drills. The Musketeers were not a standing army in the modern sense, always prepared for deployment. They were often called upon for specific missions or campaigns, then might disband or be on reduced duty during peacetime, only to be remustered when needed. This cyclical nature of their service added another layer of unpredictability to their lives. You might be a celebrated warrior one month, and struggling to make ends meet and keep your horse fed the next. So, while the allure of being the king's men sort of drew many ambitious young nobles, the path was narrow, defined by social standing and financial means. Their recruitment was selective, requiring powerful patrons, and their rigorous training emphasized practical skills like horsemanship as much as swordsmanship. It was a demanding, exclusive life, far removed from the simple tales of heroism, proving that even for an elite corps, the grind was real, and the path to glory was paved with more than just good intentions. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the king's men, sort of, and their entry into service. Your ancient ancestor, if aspiring to be a musketeer, would have faced a rigorous recruitment process requiring powerful patrons, endured intense training emphasizing horsemanship alongside swordsmanship, and navigated a rigid rank structure. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish meritocracy and clear career paths, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to an elite military existence, driven by social standing and financial investment, leaving us truly grateful for the accessible opportunities, structured training, and clear progression paths that define our military and professional lives today, far from the challenging, exclusive, and financially demanding realities of becoming a king's musketeer. Let's gently return to that exclusive world of the nascent musketeer. where recruitment demanded powerful patrons and rigorous training transformed young nobles into formidable, albeit financially strained, cavalrymen. If we've just explored the difficult path to joining their ranks, tonight we'll plunge into the grinding routine that defined their service life on the road. Billeting, boredom, and brutal battles. You might imagine every day was a thrilling adventure. But for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer often meant long stretches of monotonous travel, uncomfortable living arrangements, and sudden, terrifying bursts of intense combat. Imagine yourself, now, a newly minted musketeer, fresh from your initial, demanding training. The romantic notions you once held about constant heroic deeds quickly evaporate as you face the daily reality of life on the road. This wasn't a leisurely tour of the French countryside. It was a grueling existence, constantly moving, often at the whim of the king or his chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. You're riding for hours, sometimes days, through muddy roads or dusty trails, across vast distances of terrain that today you might cover in a couple of hours by car. Your horse, your most valuable possession, becomes your constant companion, demanding meticulous care even when you are exhausted. Imagine embarking on a cross-country road trip, but instead of air conditioning and paved highways, you have a trusty horse, rough tracks, and the ever-present threat of bandits or rival factions. It's less vacation and more survival marathon. Much of a musketeer's time was spent on mundane duties, escorting important personages, delivering dispatches, or simply guarding a specific location for weeks on end. This led to long periods of boredom, punctuated by moments of intense activity. You weren't always fighting thrilling duels or thwarting grand conspiracies. Often, you were simply waiting, standing guard, or traveling from one uneventful post to another. Imagine being on standby for weeks, polishing your equipment, mending your uniform, and trying to find ways to entertain yourself in remote, unfamiliar locations. Perhaps a small town in rural Kansas or a sleepy village in upstate New York. This monotony was a stark contrast to the thrilling narratives that have come down to us, when, on campaign, or even just moving between assignments, musketeers, like most soldiers of the era, relied heavily on billeting. This meant they were assigned to live in private homes, inns, or even barns in towns and villages along their route. This was rarely a comfortable arrangement. You might be crammed into a small room with several other musketeers, sharing beds, or sleeping on straw. Privacy was non-existent. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, leading to the rapid spread of disease. Imagine being constantly hosted by strangers, never truly having a home base, and always being subject to the hospitality or lack thereof of the locals. Sometimes, you might even have to pay for your own upkeep, further straining your already precarious finances. This was a far cry from the cozy, well-appointed lodgings often depicted in films. A common historical truth is that the daily life of a musketeer involved extensive travel and frequent billeting in private homes, often leading to uncomfortable living conditions and long periods of monotony, rather than constant adventure. This reality starkly contrasts with the romanticized image of their service. Historians still widely debate the precise economic burden billeting placed on local populations, and how often musketeers were able to extract supplies or lodging without payment, contributing to tensions with civilians. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about their brutal battles is the sheer chaos and unpredictable nature of 17th century combat, particularly for cavalry like the Musketeers. Forget the organized, almost choreographed sword fights you see in movies. Real battles were terrifying. Disorganized melees, musketeers, as light cavalry, were often used for rapid maneuvers, flanking actions, or shock charges. This meant riding directly into enemy formations. a terrifying prospect where horses could stumble, muskets misfire, and every engagement was a gamble. Imagine the deafening roar of muskets, the clang of steel, the screams of men and horses, all compressed into a swirling, bloody vortex where visibility was low and survival depended on sheer luck as much as skill. It was a far cry from the clean, single-combat duels of fiction. You might survive a dozen minor skirmishes only to be trampled by a panicked horse in a larger battle, or suffer a slow death from an infected wound. Beyond these grand, terrifying engagements, musketeers were frequently involved in smaller, equally dangerous skirmishes, guarding convoys, suppressing local rebellions, or engaging in street brawls with rival factions like the Cardinal's Guards, for instance, meant that violence could erupt at any moment, often without warning. These weren't always glorious, honorable fights. They could be dirty, brutal encounters in narrow alleys or muddy fields, where the objective was simply to survive. It's like living in a city where gang warfare is a constant threat, and you're always on edge, knowing that any corner could lead to an unexpected, violent confrontation. The equipment itself, while iconic, also contributed to their discomfort. The heavy musket, though powerful, was cumbersome and slow to reload, particularly on horseback. The famous broad-brimmed hat, while stylish, offered little real protection against a sword blow. And the distinctive blue cassock, while signifying their allegiance to the king, was not designed for comfort during long rides or extended campaigns. Imagine wearing a heavy wool coat, carrying a weighty, awkward firearm, and riding for hours on end, all while trying to maintain an air of dignified nonchalance. It was a physical ordeal. Periods of peace were not necessarily periods of comfort. Without a constant stream of military campaigns, pay could become even more irregular, and musketeers might be furloughed, forcing them to live off their meager savings or rely on family support. This constant uncertainty about their financial future added another layer of stress to a life already fraught with danger. You might survive a battle, only to face the equally grim prospect of poverty back home. So, while the allure of the musketeer might still spark the imagination, the life on the road was defined by relentless travel, often leading to uncomfortable billeting conditions, punctuated by long stretches of mind-numbing boredom and shattered by sudden, brutal battles that were far more chaotic and terrifying than any story could convey. It was a harsh, demanding existence, proving that being one of the king's men often sucked more than you think. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of life on the road for the musketeers, your ancient ancestor. If a musketeer would have endured constant travel and uncomfortable billeting, often experiencing long periods of boredom broken only by the terrifying chaos of brutal battles, far from the romanticized image, it's a powerful reminder that while we cherish tales of adventure and daring, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to a grinding, monotonous, and dangerous military existence, driven by duty and a precarious pursuit of honor, leaving us truly grateful for the comforts, stability, and predictable routines that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers, let's gently return to that arduous life on the road for the musketeer, marked by grueling travel, uncomfortable billeting, and the constant threat of brutal battles that shattered any illusion of a glamorous existence. If we've just explored the monotony and chaos of their daily grind, tonight we'll delve into the often overlooked struggle beneath the dashing exterior beyond the blade. Finances, fights, and fickle fortunes. You might imagine them flush with royal coin. But for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer often meant a precarious financial situation, leading to desperate measures, frequent altercations, and a constant reliance on luck. Imagine yourself now, having survived a skirmish or endured weeks of tiresome guard duty. You've put your life on the line for the king. You wear the prestigious blue cassock, and you carry a fine sword. Surely, you must be well compensated. Right? The truth is, the life of a musketeer was often one of significant financial strain. Their official pay, while seemingly decent on paper, was often irregular, prone to delays, or simply insufficient to cover the high costs of their profession. This led to a constant struggle beyond the blade, where the real enemy was often an empty purse and the fickle fortunes of patronage. It's like having a job where your salary is great in theory, but your boss often forgets to pay you on time, and you're expected to buy all your own expensive tools and uniforms out of pocket. Suddenly, the glamour fades pretty fast, doesn't it? Musketeers were gentlemen. Yes, but many were from the lesser nobility, with limited family wealth. They were expected to provide their own horse, which was a significant investment. A good war horse was incredibly expensive to purchase and even more costly to maintain, requiring daily feed, stabling, and veterinary care. Then there was the uniform, the distinctive blue cassock with its silver crosses, and all the accoutrements that went with it, fine boots, a good hat, and, of course, their sword and musket. These items weren't cheap, and a musketeer was responsible for replacing them if they were damaged or lost in combat. Imagine having to purchase and maintain a high-performance sports car, a full police uniform, and all your own tactical gear, all on an unpredictable salary. That's the kind of financial burden these soldiers faced. This precarious financial situation often forced musketeers to live on credit, borrowing money from innkeepers, merchants, or even other soldiers. They might accrue significant debts, leading to constant anxiety and sometimes desperate measures. It wasn't uncommon for musketeers to be pursued by creditors or even imprisoned for debt, a far cry from the carefree image of them carousing in taverns. Imagine living paycheck to unpredictable paycheck, always a step away from financial ruin, with debt collectors constantly on your heels. That certainly adds a layer of stress that the Three Musketeers never quite captured. A common historical truth is that despite their elite status, musketeers often faced significant financial difficulties due to irregular pay and the high cost of maintaining their equipment, particularly their horses, frequently leading them into debt. This reality undermines the popular image of their wealth and carefree lifestyle. Historians still widely debate the precise economic strategies musketeers employed to manage their finances, and how often they resorted to illegal activities or relied on informal networks for support. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about their fights and financial struggles is the prevalence of gambling as a desperate attempt to improve their fortunes. With irregular pay and high expenses, many musketeers turned to cards, dice, and other games of chance, hoping for a big win to alleviate their debts or afford a luxury. While gambling was a popular pastime across all social strata, for musketeers, it often became a necessity, a high-stakes gamble for survival. Imagine sitting in a smoky tavern after a long day, betting your last few coins on a game of cards, knowing that a loss might mean going without food for days, or even losing your prized horse. It wasn't always a leisurely pastime. For many, it was a desperate roll of the dice in the face of persistent poverty. This often led to more fights, not just with enemies of the king, but with fellow soldiers or commoners over gambling debts or perceived slights. These personal fights, often duels, were a pervasive part of musketeer life, driven by a complex code of honor. While dueling was officially forbidden by royal decree, punishable by death, in theory, it was rampant among the nobility and military men. A perceived insult, a challenge to one's honor, or even a dispute over a woman or gambling debt could quickly escalate into a deadly encounter. Musketeers, proud and hot-headed, were particularly prone to these confrontations. Imagine a society where a minor argument could quickly lead to a life-or-death sword fight in a secluded alley at dawn. It added a constant, low-level hum of danger to their already perilous lives, making every social interaction a potential trigger for violence. The King's Musketeers were not always loved by the general populace. Their elite status, combined with their sometimes arrogant demeanor and their reliance on billeting, often led to resentment among commoners. When their finances were particularly dire, some might resort to minor illicit activities, like smuggling or shaking down local merchants, further straining relations and contributing to their reputation as both heroes and troublesome ruffians. It's like a famous, but notoriously unreliable, rock band, always in demand, but constantly causing trouble and leaving a trail of unpaid bills and disgruntled locals wherever they go. The fickle fortunes of musketeers also extended to their careers. Promotion, as we mentioned, was often slow and dependent on patronage. A sudden change in royal favor, the fall of a powerful patron, or a misstep at court could derail a promising career, leaving a musketeer without prospects. This constant uncertainty about their future, combined with their financial struggles and the ever-present danger of death or debilitating injury, created a stressful and often unrewarding existence. So, while the image of the dashing musketeer persists, their daily reality was often consumed by the struggle beyond the blade, their precarious finances, often leading to desperate fights and gambles, and their reliance on the fickle fortunes of patronage, reveal a far more challenging and less glamorous existence than the myths suggest. They were indeed brave, but their courage was often tested not just by the enemy's sword, but by the relentless grind of financial insecurity and the constant threat of personal violence. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the life beyond the blade for the musketeers. Your ancient ancestor, if a musketeer, would have faced precarious finances, often resorting to gambling and getting into personal fights over debts or honor, constantly navigating the fickle fortunes of court. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish tales of heroic valor and carefree adventures, for centuries, countless lives were defined by financial struggle, impulsive duels, and a constant state of uncertainty, leaving us truly grateful for the stable incomes, conflict resolution, and career predictability that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers, let's gently return to that financially strapped musketeer, where fickle fortunes and frequent fights overshadowed any sense of glamorous adventure, revealing a life beyond the blade that was far from romantic. If we've just explored their precarious financial situation and propensity for duels, tonight we'll turn our attention to their iconic, yet surprisingly uncomfortable, appearance-uniformed truths, fashion, function, and filthy conditions. You might admire the dashing blue cassock and broad-brimmed hat, but for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer often meant wearing impractical clothing, struggling to maintain a facade of cleanliness, and enduring conditions that made their iconic look a daily burden. Imagine yourself, now, trying to maintain your dashing appearance amidst the grime and chaos of 17th century life on the road. The most recognizable symbol of a musketeer was their distinctive uniform, specifically the blue cassock adorned with the white cross of the Order of the Holy Spirit, often trimmed with silver or gold braid. This wasn't just clothing. It was a powerful statement of allegiance to the king, a symbol of their elite status, and a piece of fashion that instantly set them apart. It's like wearing a designer suit that also serves as a military uniform, where every stitch broadcasts your loyalty and your rank. However, this iconic uniform, while visually impressive, was not always designed for optimal function. The cassock, often made of heavy wool, could be stifling in the summer heat and cumbersome in close-quarters combat. While it offered some protection against sword cuts, a thick wool garment could deflect a glancing blow. It was not lightweight or flexible in the way modern tactical gear is. Imagine trying to engage in a fast-paced sword fight, or ride for hours, while wearing what essentially amounts to a heavy, decorated blanket. It certainly added a layer of physical challenge to every action. Beneath the cassock, musketeers typically wore fashionable civilian clothes of the period: breeches, doublets, and fine linen shirts. These were the latest fashion of 17th century France, reflecting the musketeers' status as gentlemen. However, maintaining these garments, especially on long campaigns or during extensive billeting, remember those uncomfortable living arrangements from Chapter 3, was a nightmare. Without modern washing machines or even readily available clean water, keeping clothes presentable was a constant struggle, often leading to filthy conditions. Imagine trying to keep your designer clothes clean while sleeping in barns, riding dusty roads, and fighting in muddy fields. It's a recipe for permanent stains and unpleasant odors. A common historical truth is that the musketeers' iconic uniform, while symbolic of their elite status, was often impractical for military function, and its maintenance in the absence of modern hygiene practices posed significant challenges. This led to often dirty conditions for the soldiers, despite their fashionable attire. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of wearing such a prominent and expensive uniform while often living in relative squalor, and how this tension contributed to their reputation for both arrogance and rowdiness. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about their filthy conditions and the challenges of their uniform is the constant battle against parasites and pests. Beyond just dirt and grime, musketeers, like most people in the 17th century, lived in close quarters with lice, fleas, and bedbugs. These tiny tormentors thrived in unwashed clothing and bedding, causing relentless itching, skin infections, and discomfort. Imagine trying to sleep after a long, arduous day, only to be constantly bitten by unseen creatures crawling through your clothes and hair. This constant irritation, combined with the lack of proper bathing facilities, made their lives a daily struggle against invisible enemies. A far cry from the pristine image of the heroic musketeer, it's like camping for months on end. But your sleeping bag is never cleaned, and you're sharing it with hundreds of tiny, biting insects. Their footwear also presented a challenge. High-leather riding boots were essential for horsemanship, but they were heavy, hot, and often uncomfortable, especially during long marches on foot or in hot weather. Imagine walking for miles in heavy, stiff leather boots, knowing that blisters and chafing were almost inevitable. And their hats, the famous broad-brimmed hats adorned with feathers, while stylish and offering some sun protection, could be cumbersome in strong winds or tight spaces. The lack of regular personal hygiene was another significant contributor to their filthy conditions. Bathing was infrequent, often limited to quick dips in rivers or lakes, which might not be clean. Soap, as we know it, was scarce and not widely used for personal cleansing. Instead, they might use rough cloths and water to wipe themselves down. Body odor, a constant companion, would have been masked by strong perfumes or simply accepted as an unavoidable reality of military life. Imagine relying on a quick splash in a murky river to feel clean after days of sweating, riding, and fighting, and then trying to keep your expensive uniform from looking like you slept in a ditch, which you probably did. Even their weaponry contributed to the grime. The muskets, while state-of-the-art for the time, were black powder weapons, meaning they produced a lot of smoke, residue, and soot. Maintaining these firearms involved greasy cloths and constant cleaning, often leaving traces of black powder on their hands and clothes. And their swords, used in frequent duels and skirmishes, would have required constant cleaning and oiling to prevent rust, adding another layer of maintenance to their already demanding lives. So, while the uniformed truths of the Musketeers presented a dashing and prestigious image, the fashion often compromised function, and the overall living conditions led to pervasive, filthy conditions from dirt, grime, and relentless parasites. The romantic ideal of a clean, heroic figure quickly evaporates when faced with the daily realities of their uncomfortable clothing and unhygienic existence. They wore their pride, but they also wore the grime of their demanding lives, proving that for millennia, style and substance often came with a heavy, and sometimes itchy, price. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the uniformed truths that encased the Musketeers. Your ancient ancestor, if a Musketeer, would have worn a distinctive, yet often impractical, uniform, constantly battling to maintain its fashion and function amidst filthy conditions and incessant parasites. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish stylish uniforms and modern hygiene, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to a demanding military existence where appearance often masked discomfort and pervasive uncleanliness, leaving us truly grateful for the comfortable, breathable, and easily washable clothing that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers. Let's gently return to that disheveled musketeer, his iconic uniform perhaps more impressive in myth than in the filthy conditions of daily life, where fashion often lost to function. If we've just explored the physical discomforts of their appearance, tonight we'll delve into the insidious dangers that lurked within the very heart of their service loyalty's limits: political intrigue, palace politics, and personal peril. You might imagine a straightforward devotion to the king, but for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer meant navigating a treacherous labyrinth of shifting alliances, powerful rivals, and constant threats to their very existence, where their ultimate loyalty was always under scrutiny. Imagine yourself, now, not on a dusty road or a muddy battlefield, but within the gilded halls and whispering corridors of the French court, perhaps in the magnificent Louvre Palace or the burgeoning grandeur of Versailles. This was the true battlefield for many musketeers, a place where sharp wits and political acumen were often more valuable than a keen blade. Your allegiance was to the king, but in 17th century France, the power dynamics were fluid and fraught with danger, particularly under the reign of Louis XVIII and the formidable influence of his chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. This created a complex web where loyalty's limits were constantly tested by the pervasive political intrigue and treacherous palace politics. It's like working for a massive corporation where your job security depends not just on your performance, but on whether your direct boss is favored by the CEO, or if the CEO's rivals are actively trying to undermine everyone in your department. Talk about a stressful work environment. Cardinal Richelieu, a central figure in Dumas' novels, was in reality a brilliant but ruthless statesman who consolidated royal power, often at the expense of the old nobility and anyone who opposed him. This created a constant tension at court, with factions vying for power, influence, and royal favor. As a musketeer, you were part of the king's household, putting you directly in the crosshairs of these power struggles. Your loyalty, while ostensibly to the king, could be perceived differently by powerful figures like Richelieu, who commanded his own formidable guard. Imagine being caught between two incredibly powerful, often warring, factions within your own government, where expressing loyalty to one might instantly make you an enemy of the other. This environment of political intrigue meant that every conversation, every social interaction, and every seemingly innocuous act could have profound consequences. A careless word, a misplaced allegiance, or an accidental slight to the wrong person could lead to your downfall, imprisonment, or even death. Musketeers, by virtue of their proximity to power and their dashing reputation, were often drawn into these schemes, sometimes as unwitting pawns, sometimes as active participants. It's like navigating a constant minefield of social etiquette and hidden agendas, where a simple wrong step could explode your career, or worse, your life. A common historical truth is that the King's Musketeers operated within a highly politicized French court, where their loyalty was often tested by rival factions and the machinations of powerful figures like Cardinal Richelieu. This exposed them to significant personal peril beyond the battlefield. Historians still widely debate the precise extent to which individual musketeers were actively involved in espionage or political assassinations, and how much was simply a consequence of their close proximity to power in the volatile political climate. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about palace politics and personal peril is the use of elaborate spy networks and coded communications that musketeers might unknowingly encounter or be part of. The French court was a hotbed of espionage, with various factions maintaining their own networks of informants and spies. Messages were often sent using secret compartments, coded letters, or trusted couriers. Musketeers, especially those on specific missions or delivering dispatches, might inadvertently become entangled in these clandestine operations. Imagine delivering a seemingly innocent letter for a noble, only to find out later that it contained coded instructions for a coup attempt, or that your casual conversation with a courtier was actually part of a complex intelligence-gathering operation. This added a layer of pervasive paranoia to their already dangerous lives, where trust was a rare commodity and betrayal lurked around every corner. It's like realizing that everyone around you might be part of a secret intelligence agency, and your mundane tasks could have global implications. Their personal peril wasn't limited to direct political opposition. The constant dueling, while technically illegal, was a direct result of this culture of honor and the intense rivalries within the court and military. An insult to your honor, real or imagined, had to be met with a challenge, or your reputation, and thus your prospects, could be ruined. Cardinal Richelieu, in his efforts to control the unruly nobility, famously outlawed dueling, even executing high-ranking nobles who defied the ban. This meant that a musketeer who engaged in a duel risked not just death by the sword, but also execution by the state, adding an extra layer of chilling consequence to every challenge. Moreover, the musketeers were often used as enforcers of royal decrees, which could make them unpopular with the populace or other powerful groups. Their duties might include arresting refractory nobles, suppressing local uprisings, or confiscating property. These actions, while serving the king, would inevitably create enemies, leading to retaliatory acts or ambush attempts outside the relative safety of the court. Imagine having to enforce unpopular government policies, knowing that every action you take could create new, potentially violent adversaries. Even simple proximity to the king could be dangerous. Attempts on the king's life, while rare, were a constant fear, and musketeers were expected to put their lives on the line without hesitation. This meant always being alert, always being ready to interpose themselves between the monarch and any perceived threat, making them primary targets in any attack. So, while the image of the musketeer is often one of unwavering devotion, the reality of their service was far more nuanced and dangerous. Loyalty's limits were constantly tested by the volatile political intrigue and treacherous palace politics, often leading to significant personal peril. They were not just brave soldiers. They were unwitting or unwilling participants in a high-stakes game of power, where a wrong move could cost them everything, proving that for millennia, proximity to power brought not just privilege, but pervasive, invisible dangers. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of loyalty's limits for the Musketeers, your ancient ancestor. If a musketeer would have navigated treacherous political intrigue and palace politics, where even subtle actions could lead to significant personal peril, constantly vigilant for spy networks and hidden agendas. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish loyalty and clear professional boundaries for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to a dangerous military existence, intertwined with shifting power dynamics and constant threats, leaving us truly grateful for the transparent governance and secure work environments that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers. Let's gently return to that musketeer, perpetually caught in the web of political intrigue and palace politics, where loyalty's limits meant a constant personal peril far beyond the battlefield. If we've just explored the insidious dangers of court life, tonight we'll confront the brutal, unavoidable realities of their physical existence, sickness and scars, medicine, mortality, and maiming injuries. You might complain about a minor cold, but for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer meant living with the constant threat of debilitating illness, agonizing wounds, and the very real possibility that any injury could lead to a slow, painful death, all with the limited aid of 17th century medicine. Imagine yourself now, having survived a duel or returned from a grueling campaign. You feel a pang of relief, but that relief is always tinged with anxiety. Every cough, every ache, every scraped knee is a potential harbinger of something far worse. For the musketeer, sickness and scars were not just inconveniences, they were daily realities, often more lethal than the enemy's sword. Without modern sanitation, antibiotics, or even a basic understanding of germ theory, even a minor cut could become a death sentence, leading to agonizing infections. It's like living in a constant state of low-grade fear, knowing that a simple paper cut could somehow morph into a life-threatening superbug, and the best available medical treatment involves leeches. Talk about high stakes for a tiny wound. The 17th century was a brutal time for public health. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid fever, smallpox, and various forms of plague swept through populations, particularly in crowded military camps or billeted towns. Musketeers, constantly on the move, exposed to varied environments and often living in unhygienic conditions. Remember those filthy conditions from Chapter 5 were particularly vulnerable. A single contaminated water source could decimate a company faster than any enemy army. Imagine watching your comrades fall ill, one by one, with terrifying speed, suffering from symptoms that modern medicine could cure in days, but which in your time meant certain agonizing death. A common historical truth is that diseases like dysentery and typhoid were far deadlier to 17th century soldiers, including musketeers, than combat injuries, largely due to poor sanitation and rudimentary medical understanding. This high mortality rate from illness significantly impacted military strength and individual lifespans. Historians still widely debate the precise mortality rates for various diseases within military units of that era, and the extent to which traditional herbal remedies provided any significant alleviation of symptoms versus merely spiritual comfort. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about 17th century medicine and the prevalence of maiming injuries is the common practice of immediate, often crude, amputation for severe limb wounds, performed without anesthesia and with high rates of fatal infection. If a musketeer suffered a musket ball wound or a severe sword cut to a limb, particularly one that fractured bone or damaged major arteries. The immediate solution to prevent fatal infection was often amputation. Imagine enduring such an agonizing procedure, performed by a barber surgeon who might also cut your hair and pull your teeth with basic, unsterilized tools. Perhaps after a stiff drink of brandy for pain relief, but certainly no modern anesthesia. The scream of a man undergoing such a procedure would have been a common sound in a military camp hospital, and the chance of surviving the subsequent infection was still incredibly slim. It's like breaking your leg in a car accident. And the only fix available involves a saw, a bottle of whiskey, and a 50-50 chance of dying from gangrene anyway. Combat, when it occurred, brought the risk of maiming injuries. Swords could inflict deep, bleeding cuts that left permanent scars and sometimes debilitating nerve damage. Musket balls, while not always fatal, could shatter bones, leading to chronic pain or the loss of a limb. Falls from horses, common in cavalry maneuvers, could result in concussions, broken ribs, or spinal injuries, often with no hope of recovery. Imagine surviving a terrifying melee, only to be left with a permanently mangled hand, or a limp that makes every step a painful reminder of your service. These were not the clean, dramatic sword cuts of the movies. These were gruesome, life-altering wounds. The state of medicine itself was rudimentary at best. Physicians operated on theories of humors and bloodletting, often doing more harm than good. Barber surgeons, as mentioned, performed basic operations, set bones, and pulled teeth, often without any formal medical training beyond apprenticeship. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of sterile technique, and pain relief was minimal. If you suffered a serious injury or illness, your chances of survival were largely dependent on your own body's resilience and sheer luck. Imagine being sick, and your doctor prescribes bleeding you with leeches, or giving you a concoction of herbs that tastes awful and might not do anything. It certainly makes you appreciate modern health care, even for a common cold. Mortality was high, not just from direct combat, but from these myriad illnesses and untreated injuries. Life expectancy for soldiers was significantly lower than for the general population. Many musketeers would not live to see old age, succumbing to disease, battle wounds, or the long-term effects of their harsh existence. Imagine the constant specter of death hanging over you, not just in battle, but in the seemingly innocuous daily grind, where a fever could be as deadly as a sword fight. The physical toll of their demanding life also led to long-term health issues. Constant riding could cause back problems and chafing. Heavy armor and weapons strained their bodies. Poor nutrition and hygiene weakened their immune systems. Even if they survived battles and diseases, their bodies would be worn out, riddled with aches and pains, long before their time. So, while the image of the musketeer might suggest invincible heroes, the stark reality was one of constant physical vulnerability. Sickness and scars were their grim companions, with primitive medicine offering little solace against high mortality rates and maiming injuries. Their lives were a constant battle not just against external enemies, but against the brutal internal and environmental threats that often proved far more deadly, proving that for millennia, the glory of a soldier's life often came at an excruciating physical cost. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of sickness and scars for the musketeers. Your ancient ancestor. If a musketeer would have faced constant debilitating illnesses and gruesome maiming injuries, with rudimentary medicine often doing little to stem high mortality rates, and even minor wounds potentially leading to fatal infections or crude amputations. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish modern health care and medical advancements, for centuries, countless lives were defined by constant physical suffering, a pervasive threat of disease, and agonizing, often fatal injuries, leaving us truly grateful for the antibiotics, sterile surgeries, and advanced medical care that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the king's musketeers, let's gently return to that musketeer, their body marked by sickness and scars, a stark testament to the brutal realities of 17th century medicine and high mortality. If we've just confronted the agonizing physical costs of their service, tonight we'll explore the equally painful emotional toll the women they left. Love, loss, and lonely lives. You might easily connect with loved ones across distances, but for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer meant long separations, constant anxiety for those left behind, and a pervasive sense of absence that shaped relationships defined by longing and the ever-present threat of permanent loss. Imagine yourself, now, riding away from your small family estate, leaving behind a mother, sisters, perhaps a wife or a sweetheart. The romantic ideal of the musketeer might have included brief, passionate encounters with noblewomen in Paris. But for most, the deeper, more enduring relationships were with the women they left behind in their villages or towns. These were the anchors of their lives, the emotional centers they constantly yearned for, even as duty pulled them away into a world of danger and uncertainty. It's like being in the military today, deployed overseas for months or years, where your mind is constantly drifting back to your family, your partner, or your kids, knowing that every day apart is another day of missed moments and unspoken worries. For the wives and sweethearts of musketeers, life was a constant cycle of waiting and worry. They managed households, raised children, and bore the immense emotional burden of their loved one's perilous profession. Every battle rumor, every whispered story of a fallen soldier would send a jolt of fear through their hearts. The letters, if they came at all, were slow and unreliable, offering only fleeting glimpses into the musketeer's world. Imagine your partner leaving for a dangerous job, with no cell phones, no video calls, and letters taking weeks or months to arrive, often delivering news that was already tragically old. That's the kind of agonizing uncertainty that defined their lonely lives. A common historical truth is that the wives and families of 17th century soldiers, including musketeers, endured significant emotional and practical hardships due to long separations, unreliable communication, and the constant threat of death or disability to their loved ones. This contrasts with the focus on the soldiers' own exploits. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological coping mechanisms employed by these women to manage chronic anxiety and isolation, and how much economic independence they were able to maintain in their husband's absence. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the lonely lives of the women left behind is the economic vulnerability and increased responsibilities they faced without their male protectors and providers. While their husbands were off seeking glory or just surviving, these women often had to take on the full burden of managing the family's meager resources, running small farms, or overseeing local businesses. With irregular pay, remember those fickle fortunes from Chapter 4. They might struggle to feed their children, pay taxes, or protect their property from unscrupulous neighbors or even other soldiers on billeting a callback to Chapter 3. Imagine not only worrying about your husband's life every single day, but also having to become the sole financial and physical protector of your family, fending off creditors and managing a household, all while navigating a society that often offered limited legal or economic recourse for women. It's a double burden of emotional stress and relentless practical hardship. The nature of love in this era was also different. While deep affection certainly existed, Marriages among the nobility, even the lesser nobility, were often strategic alliances, designed to consolidate land or status. For musketeers from such backgrounds, their wives might have been chosen for their dowry or connections, rather than purely for romantic love. Yet, even within these pragmatic unions, genuine affection and partnership often grew, making the separations no less painful. Imagine marrying someone primarily for their family's land, but over time, genuinely falling in love with them, only to have them constantly absent and in danger. It adds a layer of quiet tragedy to their relationships. Loss was an ever-present specter. The high mortality rates from brutal battles and rampant sickness, a callback to Chapter 7, meant that many musketeers simply did not return. A wife might wait months, even years, for news that never came, or for a brief, somber letter confirming her husband's death. There were no official casualty notifications as we know them today. News often traveled by rumor or through returning comrades. Imagine your only source of information about your loved one's fate being whispers from dusty travelers or a grim-faced friend who survived the same battle, bringing news that shatters your world. The emotional impact of this constant loss on the families was immense. Children might grow up barely knowing their fathers. Wives could be left as widows at a young age, facing an uncertain future in a society with limited support for single women. The cycle of military service, separation, and potential tragedy affected generations, casting a long shadow over the romanticized image of the musketeer. Even for the musketeers themselves, lonely lives were common, away from their families, surrounded by fellow soldiers who were often just as rough and unrefined as they were. They craved connection. While some might form strong bonds of camaraderie with their comrades, nothing could replace the warmth and intimacy of family life. Imagine returning to a crowded, noisy barracks after months of campaigning, knowing that your loved ones are hundreds of miles away, and you can't truly share your experiences or fears with anyone around you. The fleeting moments of return, if they happened, were bittersweet. A brief leave might offer a joyous reunion, only to be followed by another painful farewell. The constant rhythm of departure and longing created a unique emotional landscape for both the musketeer and the women who waited for them. So, while the grand narratives focus on the musketeers' exploits, it's crucial to remember the quiet, often agonizing, suffering of the women they left behind. Their lives were defined by constant worry, economic struggle, and the profound loss that was an inherent part of their loved one's perilous profession. Their lonely lives, marked by unending separation and the pervasive threat of tragedy, reveal a poignant and often overlooked dimension of the musketeers' world, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of glory for some often came at the cost of immense emotional hardship for those who truly loved them. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the women they left behind. Your ancient ancestor, if a musketeer, would have caused immense love, loss, and lonely lives for their families, with their wives facing profound economic vulnerability and increased responsibilities in their absence. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish tales of heroic valor and personal freedom, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to a demanding military existence that often entailed immense emotional and practical hardship for their loved ones, leaving us truly grateful for the reliable communication, support networks, and family stability that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers. Let's gently return to that musketeer. The weight of love, loss, and lonely lives felt not just by his family but by himself, a poignant counterpoint to the battlefield's brutal realities. If we've just explored the emotional toll of separation and the silent suffering of those left behind, Tonight we'll confront the pervasive, often deadly, code that governed their interactions' honor's heavy cost, duels, discipline, and death's decree. You might think of honor as a noble ideal, but for your ancient ancestor, being a musketeer meant living under an unforgiving code where the slightest perceived insult could lead to a deadly confrontation, sanctioned by a culture, if not by law, and enforced by the ever-present threat of death's decree. Imagine yourself, now, a musketeer in 17th century France. You're not just a soldier, you're a gentleman, and your reputation, your very social standing, hinges on your honor. This wasn't some abstract concept, it was a tangible currency, meticulously guarded and fiercely defended. A perceived slight, a cutting remark, a challenge to your courage, or even an accidental jostle in a crowded street could be considered an affront that demanded satisfaction. This strict adherence to honor's heavy cost meant that life was a constant tightrope walk, where every interaction held the potential for a deadly outcome. It's like living in a high school where a single sarcastic comment or a bump in the hallway could escalate into a full-blown, no-holds-barred fight, and your social standing depended entirely on whether you backed down or stood your ground. Talk about high-stakes social interactions. The most iconic and often deadly manifestation of this code was the duel. While dueling was explicitly forbidden by royal edict, punishable by imprisonment, fines, or even execution, it was rampant among the nobility and military men of the era. For musketeers, who prided themselves on their martial prowess and their hot-headed bravery, dueling was almost a way of life. It was seen as the ultimate arbiter of honor, a personal trial by combat to settle grievances that could not be resolved by words. Imagine a society where disputes over anything from gambling debts, remember those fickle fortunes, from Chapter 4 to a woman's honor, were settled not in court, but with sharpened steel at dawn. Far from prying eyes, the rules of dueling, though informal, were strict. Challenges were issued, seconds were chosen, and the location was typically a secluded spot, a quiet field outside the city walls, or a secluded forest clearing. The weapons were usually rapiers, long, slender swords designed for thrusting, though daggers or even pistols could sometimes be involved. The fight would continue until one party was disarmed, wounded, or, most often, killed. Imagine stepping onto that field, knowing that your life could end in moments, not for king or country, but for a personal slight, a whispered insult. The psychological pressure alone would be immense. A common historical truth is that dueling was a widespread, though illegal, practice among the French nobility and military in the 17th century, driven by a rigid code of honor, and frequently resulted in severe injury or death, despite official prohibitions. This highlights the disconnect between royal authority and aristocratic custom. Historians still widely debate the precise number of duels fought and lives lost during this period, and the effectiveness of royal edicts in curbing the practice, given the culture of defiance among the nobility. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about their discipline and the paradoxical nature of dueling is the internal conflict faced by musketeers caught between their personal code of honor and the king's express decree against dueling. While the king, and especially Cardinal Richelieu, as we touched upon in Chapter 6, sought to stamp out dueling to maintain order and prevent the wasteful loss of skilled officers, the culture of honor among gentlemen often superseded royal law. A musketeer who refused a challenge, even one that was trivial, risked social ostracization, disgrace, and a ruined career. Imagine being torn between obeying your sovereign's law, which could mean public humiliation, and upholding your personal honor, which could mean execution by the state if you survived the duel itself. This put musketeers in an impossible bind. constantly risking their lives for an ideal that their own king condemned. It's like being forced to choose between breaking the law to save your reputation or keeping your job but being an outcast among your peers. This paradox speaks volumes about the limits of royal discipline. While the king had the power to order executions for dueling, enforcing this across a proud, often rebellious nobility was incredibly difficult. Many duels went unreported or were covered up by fellow participants. The lure of proving one's courage and avenging one's honor was often stronger than the fear of royal punishment. Beyond dueling, the daily discipline of a musketeer was harsh. They were soldiers, after all, subject to military law and the whims of their officers. Minor infractions could result in physical punishment, public humiliation, or even a stint in a military prison. This constant pressure, combined with the financial strain and the dangers of disease, created a life of relentless stress. Imagine being constantly under scrutiny, where a moment of weakness or an act of defiance could lead to immediate, painful consequences. The death's decree hung heavy over every musketeer. Whether from a duel, a battlefield wound, remember those maiming injuries from Chapter 7, or a rampant disease, mortality was a constant companion. Unlike modern soldiers who often receive formal notification and support, the death of a musketeer might simply mean they didn't show up for roll call. Their horse was found riderless, or a brief mention in a letter home, often days or weeks later. This pervasive threat of death, combined with the stringent code of honor, shaped every aspect of their existence. It's like living under a constant silent countdown, knowing that any moment could be your last, and that your fate could be sealed by something as trivial as an argument over a spilled drink. The collective psychology of living under such a code was intense. It fostered a culture of bravado and recklessness, where courage was paramount and fear was suppressed. This made them formidable soldiers, but also incredibly vulnerable individuals, constantly pushing boundaries and facing existential threats. They lived fast, loved hard when they could, remembered the women they left, and died young, driven by a code that demanded the ultimate sacrifice for something as intangible as reputation. So, while the image of the dueling musketeer embodies romantic courage, the reality was a brutal existence defined by honor's heavy cost. Frequent duels, often defying royal discipline, carried the ever-present threat of death's decree, forcing them to navigate an impossible choice between reputation and survival. Their lives were a testament to an unforgiving code that demanded the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of pride, proving that, for millennia, the pursuit of honor could indeed be a deadly and profoundly lonely path. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of honor's heavy cost for the musketeers, your ancient ancestor. If a musketeer would have faced constant duels driven by honor, defying royal discipline and risking death's decree, navigating an impossible bind between loyalty and reputation, it's a powerful reminder that while we cherish personal integrity and courage, for centuries, countless lives were dedicated to an unforgiving code that demanded deadly confrontations over perceived insults, leaving us truly grateful for the civil laws, conflict resolution, and personal freedoms that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of the King's Musketeers. Let's gently return to that musketeer, perpetually on edge, his very existence shaped by honor's heavy cost, where duels and the threat of death's decree loomed larger than any battlefield. If we've just confronted the unforgiving code that governed their personal interactions, tonight we'll conclude our journey by stepping back, allowing history's gentle whisper to reconcile the dramatic myths with the quiet truths, as we consider the fading flourish, legacy, legends, and lingering questions. You might idealize their swagger and daring, but for your ancient ancestor. Being a musketeer was a life of profound contradictions, and their enduring image today is a testament to the powerful, yet often misleading, narratives that shape our understanding of the past. Imagine yourself, now, back in your own time, far from the muddy battlefields and gilded, treacherous courts of 17th century France. You might see a movie poster, a book cover, or even a theme park character inspired by the Musketeers. These are the legends, the romanticized versions that have captured the global imagination for centuries. The dashing heroes, the lightning-fast swordsmen, the unwavering loyalty to king and country. These are the fading flourish, the brilliant, yet incomplete, strokes of history that linger in our collective consciousness. But as we've seen, the legacy of the Musketeers is far more complex, layered with hardship, discomfort, and danger that often went unacknowledged in the popular tales. It's like admiring a beautiful old photograph, only to realize that the vibrant colors were added much later, and the original image was far grittier. The legends of the Musketeers are, in many ways, an evolution of their own contemporary image. Even in their own time, they cultivated an aura of daring and exclusivity. They were often portrayed in popular pamphlets and broadsides as fearless defenders of the king, embodying a certain kind of aristocratic bravado. This was the nascent stage of their legacy, building a reputation that would later be amplified and reshaped by literature. Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers, published in the 19th century, was the single most powerful force in cementing their romantic image, transforming real, often brutal, soldiers into timeless symbols of adventure and friendship. Imagine a historical figure from today, perhaps a decorated astronaut or a groundbreaking scientist, whose real-life achievements are already impressive. But then a blockbuster novel turns them into a superhero with impossible powers. And that's how everyone remembers them. That's the power Dumas wielded over the Musketeers' legacy. However, the lingering questions persist beneath this polished veneer. How many Musketeers truly lived the life of constant, glamorous adventure depicted in fiction? How many more succumbed to disease remember sickness and scars from Chapter 7? Financial ruin those fickle fortunes from Chapter 4? Or a lonely death in a forgotten skirmish? The vast majority of their existence was likely far more mundane, defined by long marches, uncomfortable billeting a callback to Chapter 3, and periods of mind-numbing boredom, punctuated by terrifying bursts of genuine violence. The heroism was real, but it was often quiet, desperate, and unglamorous. A common historical truth is that the romanticized legends of the Musketeers, largely perpetuated by 19th century literature, often overshadow the historical realities of their challenging and often unglamorous lives as soldiers, leading to significant discrepancies between myth and actual experience. This enduring popular image contributes to the ongoing fascination with their historical context. Historians still widely debate the precise ways in which their actual daily lives and personalities contributed to, or diverged from, the heroic archetypes established in popular culture, and how much of their perceived swagger was genuine versus an outward coping mechanism for hardship. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the legacy of the Musketeers is the subtle yet persistent influence of their gentleman-soldier ideal on later military traditions and concepts of masculinity. Even as military organizations became more professional and less reliant on noble birth, the idea of a soldier who was also cultured, honorable, and skilled in more than just combat drew inspiration from figures like the Musketeers. Their image, despite its flaws, contributed to a long-standing European ideal of the aristocratic officer brave in battle, refined in manners, and capable of both wielding a sword and engaging in witty conversation. Imagine a modern military officer who is not only a brilliant strategist, but also a gifted musician and a connoisseur of fine art. That kind of multifaceted ideal, blending martial prowess with cultural sophistication, has historical roots in the very image the Musketeers projected, even if the reality was often far rougher. It's a testament to the enduring power of aspirational figures, even when their daily lives were far from ideal. The timeless quest for certain qualities in a hero: courage, loyalty, a sense of adventure, and perhaps a touch of rebellious charm finds a powerful embodiment in the Musketeer legend. These qualities resonate across generations, pulling us back to a time when honor was everything, and life was lived and lost with dramatic flair. Even today, we are drawn to characters who stand up for what's right, who face impossible odds with a knowing smirk, and who value friendship above all else. The Musketeers, through their enduring legends, continue to satisfy this fundamental human desire for heroes. Yet, as we drift towards sleep, we must also acknowledge the inherent dangers and injustices of their world. The high mortality rates, the brutal medicine, the pervasive filthy conditions, the constant financial strain, and the ever-present threat of personal peril from both enemies and fellow gentlemen in a duel. These were the unromantic truths that underpinned their existence. They were not just characters in a story, they were real men, with real fears, real pain, and real struggles, who often lived incredibly tough lives under a demanding and unforgiving system. The Musketeers, with their iconic blue cassocks and flashing rapiers, remain a powerful symbol. But their true legacy lies not just in the heroic legends they inspired, but in the gritty historical context from which they emerged. Their lives were a fascinating blend of glamour and squalor, honor and brutality, loyalty and cunning. They remind us that history is rarely as clean or as simple as the stories we tell ourselves, and that true understanding often requires looking beyond the dazzling surface to discover the messy, human truths that lie beneath. So, as the turbulent waters of ancient France gently recede, and the distant echoes of muskets and clashing steel softly fade into the quiet hum of your room, let your thoughts settle. Allow the intricate details of their desperate existence, their brutal challenges, and their enduring, yet complex, legacy to drift softly from your mind. There's no rush, nowhere to be but here, in this peaceful moment. The grim realities of being a musketeer, with all its contradictions, its profound suffering for the promise of power, its terrifying risks overshadowed by an unyielding system, its intimate vulnerability met by crushing control, remind us of a raw, untamed past. Its story is a profound tapestry of human dedication and the chilling demands of ancient life, a distant echo of a time when freedom meant everything, and where the line between miraculous survival and tragic loss was often blurred. Just relax, and let sleep softly claim you, knowing that the turbulent waters of the past have calmed, leaving you in the comforting quiet of the present, where the only adventure you need now is the one waiting for you in your dreams.